Good evening and welcome to the Jeremiah Patterson Show. Tonight we bring to you a special report on how Republicans are planning to steal Reagan-end elections here in the United States. This is part one of that special report, the race to redistrict, as well as to gut the 1965 Voting Rights Act. Now, I've covered this multiple times here on the show, even before the 2024 election, but the theme remains the same, and the movement behind this has grown more strategic and more coordinated. I know this is a bit of a long episode, but I ask that you stay with me and you share it with as many people as possible. Definitely feel free to pause, to come back, to watch it in variations, but please be sure to watch the whole episode. We begin tonight here with the Killer Bees. It was May of 1979 and 12 Democratic state senators fled the state of Texas, breaking quorum in the state Senate to block consideration on an election bill that would separate the 1980 presidential primary election from the state's general primary. They were staunchly against this, and they did not just walk out, but they left in bumblebee attire. This was reporting here from NBC Nightly News.
Again this morning, Lieutenant Governor Bill Hobby called senators to order. And once again, no quorum. The Killer Bees gone, as they have been since Friday. The 12 fugitive senators have eluded 50 full-time state patrolmen, investigators, and Texas Rangers. Police even searched by helicopter and in Mexico. But patrolmen failed, and so were nicknamed the Bumblebees.
They could not find the bumblebees. This was a real thing in Texas Democratic politics. It says here, see, the miracle of the Killer Bees, 12 senators who changed Texas politics. By the time they decided to come back to Texas after leaving the state, of course, they had declared victory. This is from the New York Times. Quote, it appears that 2/3 majority needed for final passage will not materialize, and that the Killer Bees have destroyed, at least for the current legislative session, any prospects for a separate presidential preference primary in Texas for 1980. The senators returned to Senate galleries filled with supporters who applauded and buzzed. Many were wearing yellow and black Killer Bee t-shirts. End quote. So that was Texas in May of 1979. 24 years later, Karl Rove, the deputy White House chief of staff under the Republican president George W. Bush, he calls up Texas Republicans and he's like, hey, I need you guys to draw a new map. I need you to draw a completely new map here. And guess who left again to go protect voters' rights? It was Texas Democrats.
Story of politics, Texas style.
The political fallout is starting to generate national attention.
I have here some cards of Democrats that are missing in action.
Restless Republicans have even created a deck of playing cards of their most wanted colleagues.
Something tells me that if the posse can find this guy, that we can do the work of the people of Texas.
That guy is State Representative Jim Dunham, who says Texas Republicans are just following orders from Washington.
We have a message for Tom DeLay. Don't mess with Texas.
Right. Dunham and 50 other Democrats remain holed up in a hotel in Ardmore, Oklahoma. Flexing their political muscles, they refuse to come home until Republicans drop a redistricting plan.
The issue is democracy going to win out over excessive greed, excessive political greed? And the only way we can make sure that it does is if we stand up.
That was reporting from KVUE News in 2003. Texas Democrats fled the state to avoid giving the state house a necessary quorum to vote on the new proposed maps. They said, we are not going to allow the White House to mess with Texas or our democracy. They said, hey, we're not going to let this happen. And so they fled the state. And ultimately, the 2003 Texas Democratic walkout did not stop Republicans from redistricting, and it resulted in them drawing a new map anyway, cementing their electoral advantage, which they're still benefiting from today. But it was the resistance that mattered. In 2021, of course, the same thing happened, and Texas Democrats left the state. Again, Republicans were still able to push their map through, but it's that resistance and that fight that was integral in that movement. And so this summer, when Trump called the governor of Texas, Greg Abbott, insisting that Republicans redraw their maps to pick up 5 more House seats. Everyone not only recognized how dangerous this was, but also that it was the same old play. And so Democrats mounted a persistent resistance campaign, and they left the state again.
America and Texans see this process for what it is, a desperate partisan attempt to hold on to power. The Republican Party is increasingly unpopular, and this panel exemplifies that. If your party focused more on improving life for working class people instead of firing government workers, eliminating FEMA, terrorizing immigrant communities, detaining innocent citizens, increasing the deficit by trillions, attacking reproductive freedom, and stripping health care from the poor, you wouldn't need to rely on lies to justify racist gerrymandering to hold power in 2026.
I didn't run for office to walk out of the Capitol, but I also didn't run for office to stand by while democracy is stolen in broad daylight.
And let me be clear, the districts that are targeted overwhelmingly are black districts, okay? They are pitting Jasmine Crockett against Mark Vesey, and they are pitting Al Green against CD18, where there's a black representative. If you don't know who sat in CD18, I live in CD18, by the way, Barbara Jordan, Mickey Leland, Craig Washington, Sheila Jackson Lee, and Sylvester Turner. So those are the people they're trying to take out. So I'm real upset about it, and my constituents are real upset about it.
Because this is about racism. And if you can't hear it from them, then hear it from me. As a white woman and a daughter of a man of privilege and power, he knew that his strength was to bring people that didn't look like him to the table of government. And so 50 years later, after Barbara Jordan, aided by white people to have a voice, the first woman of color elected to the South, a woman who sat in the impeachment of Nixon, a woman who said that finally, after amendment, debate, and vote, I am finally part of we the people. To stand here as a 50-year-old woman and know that we now go back in time. So let's talk about cowardice and cheats. Because if you knew you could win this next election, you wouldn't be taking this effort to try to steal 5 seats from elected officials that members of color elected to represent them in Washington, D.C.
I am testifying on behalf of the people of Texas 30 and frankly all the people that have any sense or any compassion in the state of Texas. And I'm old enough to remember when Texas lawmakers took pride in not being D.C. I'm old enough to remember how you ignored the voices of people during the last redistricting. I'm old enough to remember that we were assured that we would have our own map done from the Texas House, yet we didn't. Instead, we took the Texas Senate map. I'm old enough to remember that we were assured that we would have 2 new seats, one in the DFW area and one in the Harris-Fort Bend area. I am old enough to remember that we acknowledged that the Latino community absolutely was entitled to another seat under the Voting Rights Act. I am old enough to remember when we fought the current maps because while 95% of the growth was due to people of color, not only did they create 2 new Anglo-majority seats that are approximately 766,000 people each, y'all paired the 9th and 18th congressional districts and we had to fight to unpair them. I am old enough to remember that I testified in court about a month ago and the state took the position that they didn't consider race when they created the maps that we're currently sitting under. I am old enough to remember that this legislature has consistently been found to be intentionally racially discriminatory in the drawing of its maps ever since the Voting Rights Act was enacted. To comply with the Voting Rights Act, we should have 60% of the seats that allow people of color to elect their representatives. That would be 24 seats. Instead, we currently only have 14.
Once again, Texas Democrats pushing back fiercely and persistently against this racist gerrymandering map. In the end, of course, they did not win this battle, but Democrats are determined to win the war, at least in recent weeks and months. And they're no longer playing by the rules, but deliberately choosing to fight fire with fire. California Governor Gavin Newsom stood up and said that our state is going to draw a new map with the political advantage of giving us 5 new House Democratic seats. Unlike Texas, though, they are actually allowing the people to vote on this and not just forcing it down the constituents' throats and just having them having to adapt to this. Of course, early voting for California has started, and Election Day is November 4th this year. People are being sent flyers, of course, and asked to vote yes on Proposition 50. And of course, if Proposition 50 is approved by the voters, it would make those new maps in the state of California legal. In the state of Virginia, Democrats announced last week that they will redistrict as well to counter what Republicans are doing. They intend to draw a new congressional map following California. The president pro tempore of the Virginia Senate said that stay tuned for the state of Virginia as they are going to be following California's lead. Now, interestingly, the state of Maryland, they said they are not going to be doing this. According to their legislative session there, the Democratic leaders in the state legislature said they are not going to be countering what Republicans are doing across the country, which is interesting. It'll be interesting to see if that changes as political pressure mounts up, of course, by, protesters and people all across the country who are enraged what Republicans are doing and are concerned that Democrats continuing to play by the rules is not effective, which it really isn't if you're in an authoritarian state. So it'll be interesting to see if that changes soon. But this political battle has expanded across the country as the Trump administration is really determined to completely implement this strategy in all red states. Despite Democratic resistance in Missouri, where representatives sat in for over 100 hours, Republican Governor Mike Kehoe signed this new racist redistricting map into law. In spite of this and the Republican pushback, Leanne Villaluz and 3,000 volunteers from a group called People Not Politicians, they are trying to get this map repealed. They're going door to door knocking and spreading the word about it. Per reporting from NPR, quote, if they're successful in getting more than 106,000 signatures across the state by December 11th, a referendum will go back on the ballot in 2026 for voters to decide whether they want to keep it or reject it. The group says it's already gathered more than 100,000 signatures and is still collecting more. If they get the signatures they need, the referendum would stall the map until voters weigh in next year. So once again, that is a developing story as Missouri voters are trying to get that reversed. We will keep you updated on that. In Indiana, Republicans faced a pressure campaign from the White House in which Trump called reluctant members personally. The former Republican governor of Indiana told them not to cave to the White House. And look at that. They have said that they do not have the votes to pass this. Quote, the votes aren't there for redistricting. Trump's former 2024 deputy campaign manager then tweeted, quote, now the real fun begins, presumably threatening Indiana Republicans. Now, Indiana Governor Mike Braun called a special session to try this again. So we'll see what happens there. Of course, they're already facing a pressure campaign from the White House as the White House is reaching out to Republican legislators all across the country to do this. In Utah, Republicans there are unsurprisingly shambolic in their effort to institute gerrymandered maps. So earlier this month, they passed the new map, creating 2 more seats. A week later, they decided, hey, we're going to repeal that 2018 initiative approved by the voters that bans partisan gerrymandering, so we can just do whatever we want. And so then we don't have to do the new congressional map. So the Republican lieutenant governor of Utah, Deidre Henderson, she said, this is just too chaotic. And so last week, after doing all of this, Republicans withdrew their initiative to repeal Proposition 4. They said, we're not going to do it. The voters are. So we're not going to do this. You guys are going to do it. So you can see the judge's face there. It's like she's had enough with this whole shambolic process. And the reason this is even before her bench is because this new map has to be approved by her before it's official in the state of Utah. That's just how their politics, that's just how, the legal process works in the state of Utah when it comes to new redistrict maps. And Republicans are inflicting, just widespread chaos upon themselves here. So that's the state of Utah right now. In New Hampshire, Republicans have just given up trying to do a new map. For now, that effort is frozen because of stiff resistance from the Republican governor. In Ohio, Republicans have reportedly not provided a map while Democrats continue presenting their bipartisan redrawn map. The Democratic leadership in Ohio is accusing Republicans of slow walking this process the whole month of October. So, of course, they will be able to enter the month of November in which they can just pass their own map without Democrats' approval. So that seems to be the widespread goal for Republicans, to just wait out the clock. In the state of North Carolina, already one of the most gerrymandered states in the nation, last week they debated and then passed their new Redistrict map. And before it happened, Democratic State Senator Michael Garrett condemned the map in a powerful speech.
Democracy dies when we politicians rig the game, when we draw lines to choose our voters instead of letting our voters choose us, when we admit, and let's be honest, that's exactly what's happening here today, when we admit that we can't win in fair competition, so we'll just change the rules. When we're so afraid of the people's judgment, we rig the system to avoid it. That's not democracy, folks. That's tyranny with a prettier name. That's authoritarianism in a suit and tie. I thought elected officials were supposed to represent their constituents, not take orders from Washington on how to rig maps. I thought we fought a revolution specifically to establish that no one, not a king, not a president, not anyone, is above the will of the people. The president said he's entitled to more seats. Entitled? That word should chill every American to the bone. No elected official is entitled to anything. But here's what authoritarians and would-be kings never understand. You cannot kill an idea whose time has come. Yes, democracy may bleed today. Yes, this body may succeed in rigging these maps. Yes, the party in control might steal a few more seats, and they might hold on to power for a few more years. You can rig the map, but you can't rig the people's determination. You cannot silence our votes, but you can silence our votes, but you cannot silence our voices. You can try to break our democracy, but it will not break our will to restore it. The fight doesn't end today. It doesn't end with this vote. It doesn't end until we restore the promise, until we repair what's been broken, until we leave our children in America worthy of the sacrifices that built it. So I will keep fighting, because the promise is worth keeping. The covenant is worth honoring. Democracy is worth defending. And America, this magnificent, flawed, frustrating, beautiful experiment in self-governance, America is worth fighting for. Even today, especially today, as democracy takes another bullet, I will keep that promise. Thank you, Madam President. Thank you to the people of North Carolina. And may God give us the strength to be worthy of our time and the promise that we're entrusted to keep.
Once again, North Carolina Democrat Michael Garrett, state senator there, vehemently condemning Republicans for what he called an authoritarian power grab in silencing the voice of the people. That full speech is 25 minutes and is available to watch on YouTube, which really is even now more worth the watch, because Republicans had his words stricken from the record. He responded in a lengthy Facebook post in regards to that Republicans found basically his words so offensive, so, basically a visceral condemnation of what they were doing, that they had his words stricken. So he responded in a Facebook post. He said here, quote, "They were so afraid They erased the words. Yesterday, I stood on the Senate floor and spoke truth about what happened in North Carolina, about democracy being stolen in broad daylight, about rigged maps and broken promises, about betraying every sacrifice ever made for the right to vote. And then something extraordinary happened. Senator Grafstein moved that my remarks be spread upon the journal, entered into the permanent record of this body. This is routine. It happens constantly. It's almost always done without objection. A simple courtesy extended across party lines for speeches on both sides. The Republicans immediately objected. They forced a vote. And on a straight party line, they voted to keep my words out of the permanent record. In my entire time in the Senate, I have never seen this happen. Let that sink in for a moment. They rigged the maps, then they voted to erase any record of someone calling them out for it. This isn't about me. This is about what their fear reveals. They weren't afraid of my words because they were false. They were afraid because they were true. They weren't blocking the record to protect themselves. They were doing it because they know history will judge them harshly for what they did yesterday. They stood on that floor, voted to rig our elections on Trump's command, and then in the very next breath tried to memory hole anyone who dared to say it out loud. That's not the behavior of people confident in their principles. That's the behavior of people ashamed of their actions. End quote. So once again, this is State Democratic Senator Michael Garrett condemning Republicans, again, after doing it on the floor, in this lengthy Facebook post after they voted to have his words stricken from the record and to not make it permanent. So, I mean, one of the things that I found consistent in doing research, not just for this special, but also what I've been doing just really the whole year, is what I see as my homework is not just to report on the authoritarian power grabs and the evisceration of, democratic institutions and systems at the federal level, what the Trump administration is doing and what officials like Ross Vaught and Stephen Miller and Steve Bannon and all those officials who are tied with Project 2025 and intrinsically want to see this country, an authoritarian dictatorial state. I also see it as my homework to do research on what Republicans are doing in their states, how Republicans are trying to consolidate power for authoritarian rule in their states. And it's important that we keep up with that because consistent throughout history, there have been authoritarian Republican officials before in the states. This is why state elections are so important. This is why your local elections, your city elections, your school board elections are so important. Because yes, what's going on at the federal level is an authoritarian takeover of our would-be democratic republic. But also what's happening in your states is a replication of that. It's the same thing. And so watch what Republicans are doing in the states. Don't just watch what's happening at the federal level. Watch what's happening in your own backyard as well. Know what's happening. Watch your local news. Be informed. And so right before this map passed in the House, Democratic State Representative Robert Reeves, he stood up and he gave remarks effectively echoing Senator Garrett, persuading Republicans not to approve this at all.
One day it's you. I'm scared. I'm not angry. I am frightened. Indiana Senate Republicans say they do not have votes to pass mid-cycle redistricting despite a pressure campaign from the White House, according to a spokesperson for Senate President Pro Tem Roderick Bray. How was he answered? An immediate answer from a campaign manager, not an elected official, who said, oh yeah, now the real fun begins. I don't know any other way to interpret that if I'm the president pro tem of that Senate, except I just got threatened. It feels good when you're doing it for somebody that you like. But everything we do in this building has to be done based on what happens when it's a guy I don't like. And I'm going to tell you guys a secret. I'm lucky enough to be in the Democratic Party, so I know full well how much people can dislike you, even in your own party. Don Davis is getting drawn out for one simple reason. There may be other reasons, and that's for other people to discuss. You know why Don Davis is going home? Because he had the nerve to say Northeastern North Carolina can't survive with these Medicaid cuts. Northeastern North Carolina cannot survive with these education cuts. I have got to put my constituents first. And you know the sad thing? Don Davis was always called one of the good ones by a lot of people in this chamber. He was a good one. And he's going home. Don Davis busted his behind when he was here to work both sides. He busted his behind to compromise, and he's going home. And I can go ahead and tell you, Roderick Bray can go ahead and count his days. He's getting primaried and he's going home. I said yesterday, John Bolton is under indictment. James Comey is under indictment. And I know that's not a big deal to anybody now because you're like, look, I'm going to stay on the good side. But what happens when it's your district? What happens when the people who put you up here say we can't do what they're asking us to do? You're right, it's been transparent. But I'm not going to get into why we're doing this because I'm not in the room. I know what the news has reported. I know what the quid pro quo is supposed to be for this. And what I know is the House didn't draw this map. The House wasn't asked their opinion. And the House is getting nothing out of this except for to be able to say that we are doing what we've been asked to do. And it is shocking to me. It is shocking to me where we are right now. This is easy. If you are Republican in this state and in this country, you can run anything. Every last one of you can stand up and say, nah, I'm not doing this. And you know what can happen to you? Nothing. I don't know if this ever switches. I don't know if this ever changes. I don't know if we're going to have elections in 4 years. But what I know is as long as I'm allowed to serve the people of my district and the state.
The gentleman is beyond 8 minutes. I don't think I've ever cut you off, but I would ask you to wrap up your comments.
And I understand, and I am expressing a lot of points that would have been made by a lot of people on this side because they're angry and upset. The Senate debated for hours, and I appreciate where you're coming from, Mr. Speaker. It is just, I can't watch it die like this. But it seems like I'm going to have to. But what I would ask is you mark this day. Mark this day. Because one day they're coming to you and they're going to ask you to do something that you just can't do. And because we have set the precedent that only one person in the party matters, you're going home. You've got a chance to vote no. Be like Indiana. Be like all these other states who just said, nah, we're just not doing this. Or we've got a chance to do what we're told and then one day look up and say, God, I wish that hadn't happened. I wish I had taken that moment. Thank you.
Once again, State Representative Robert Reeves slamming Republicans for supporting this new racist redistricting map that will target black and brown voters across the state and also targets Democratic politicians currently in office like Congressman Don Davis. Again, you do this by diluting the minority vote, by combining them all into one district, therefore making a single district, a single majority-minority district. And then you stifle your voters into this larger district, of course, which makes it more likely to go for your party. So that's where we are. Of course, like in other Republican states that have done this, in North Carolina, we're already seeing pushback and lawsuits. That is an ongoing matter, of course. We'll keep you updated on that as we continue to learn more. But all that they're trying to do with voter suppression is part of a broader effort to eviscerate the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Because it's not just about redrawing these lines and trying to get away with that and to make it to whereas you create, just a couple majority minority districts and everyone else is in completely different districts. So you dilute the vote. It's not just that. It's also hoping to eviscerate Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act so that, therefore, Republicans can do this in the states unchecked. Watch. In July of 1946, the state of Georgia was in the middle of a pretty contentious gubernatorial election, and one of the pressing issues was if black men should be able to vote. And this man here on your screen, Maceo Snipes, served in the military fighting in World War II. When he returned home, he considered for months actually if he should go vote because it was his constitutional right under the 15th Amendment, but it was still quite dangerous. Up until that point, Georgia had allowed only whites to vote in the Democratic primaries and said that black people could only vote in the general election. Though that policy was inherently racist and federal courts struck it down in early 1946. So Maceo Snipes, seeing the two candidates, one of whom was the two-term governor, Eugene Talmadge, who was in favor of enlisting the all-white primary, and the somewhat progressive James Carmichael, he made the uniform decision that he was going to go vote. Now, the KKK in this time essentially was continuing their racist tradition of intimidating black voters, making it clear that they would hunt and kill any black person that voted. But Snipes was not fazed, and on election day, he audaciously walked into his local polling place and he cast his vote. He was the only black man to vote in his entire Georgia county. It was the day after that 4 white men showed up outside his grandfather's farmhouse where Maceo and his mother were having dinner. The KKK called him outside to meet, and then they shot him in the back. Maceo Snipes was executed because he dared to practice his right to vote. He was a war veteran, and he was still, once again, viciously murdered because he practiced his right to vote. On March 7th, 1965, on what became known as Bloody Sunday, a group of mostly black civilians, including John Lewis, peacefully protested the attack on their right to vote in Selma, Alabama, after yet another black person was killed. Once they made it to the Edmund Pettus Bridge, John Lewis and others saw the officers in sight from afar. He tried to reason with them, but after giving a warning for the crowd to disperse, the officers surged forward, unprovoked, to attack the crowd. They were beat with nightsticks, tear gas canisters exploded, stinging the air and blinding people in the eyes. Mounted deputies charged into the crowd, trampling people beneath horse hooves. Protesters fled, slipped, screamed. John Lewis was clubbed on the head. His skull was fractured. Blood was stained on the pavement. People cried and crawled, trying to find help, trying to find air, all because they were marching for their right to vote. It was only days after that finally the Voting Rights Act of 1965 was introduced and signed into law by President Lyndon B. Johnson, with figures like Dr. Martin Luther King there, live to see it happen and shake his hand. Because they knew what this moment meant, how monumental it was, how long of a fight this had been for minorities, and specifically black people in this country. Because although black people and minority groups were granted the right to vote technically under the law, they were still people in this country, and institutions in this country, and elected officials who did not want them to vote. And so the Voting Rights Act of 1965 was a huge deal. It was big. In 2013, in the case called Shelby County versus Holder, the U.S. Supreme Court struck down Section 4B of that Voting Rights Act of 1965, which contained the formula used to identify states and localities with histories of racial discrimination in voting. This formula had required those areas to seek federal approval or pre-clearance before changing their voting laws under Section 5 of the Act. And so essentially by declaring Section 4B unconstitutional, the court effectively rendered Section 5 unenforceable, removing a critical safeguard against discriminatory voting practices. So that decision effectively opened the door for states to pass restrictive voting laws without federal oversight, and prompting a wave of legislation that disproportionately affected voters of color. In the summer of 2021, Supreme Court Justice Neil Gorsuch slipped a single paragraph concurring opinion onto a major court ruling that further eviscerated the Voting Rights Act. The question he raised was about Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. He asked, who has the right to sue to try to enforce that key section of the landmark law. And for decades, we have seen private individuals and groups who did not represent the federal government have filed numerous lawsuits under Section 2 that prevented states and local governments from drawing up racist voting maps to suppress minority voters. But, Justice Clarence Thomas also joins Neil Gorsuch in that sentiment about gutting the Voting Rights Act. Since 1994, he has held the belief that that section of the Voting Rights Act prohibiting practices denying Black people, Hispanics, and other minorities an equal right to vote should be removed. He said it was exacerbating racial tensions rather than easing them. And because of Gorsuch's paragraph, Thomas's views, and the conservative majority's willingness to gut the Voting Rights Act completely, we are seeing multiple different states rushing to be the first to get a case like that before the Supreme Court. In June of this year, the court was presented with the Louisiana case on creating 2 Black majority congressional districts when Louisiana is 32% Black, making Black people the second largest racial group in the state after white residents. There are 6 congressional seats in Louisiana. And so what this new redistricting map would do is dilute the Black vote. It would effectively suppress Black voters in the state of Louisiana. According to reporting from NPR, in doing this, Republicans are seeking to protect key seats for them, like Republican House Speaker Mike Johnson and Majority Leader Steve Scalise. So the court did not rule on this. They said they needed a little bit more time to review it. Justice Thomas wasn't happy about that because he was ready completely to just gut it. He was ready to just outright gut Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, which would have allowed this map to go into effect, and also for every other Republican state to effectively do the same thing, to have their way with this kind of racist voter suppression as well. Because understanding the Louisiana case is also understanding that this would not only stop private citizens from suing over maps like this, but it also would give states the green light to draw up voting maps that are not only not drawn fair with consideration to race, because according to him, it violates the Constitution's guarantee of equal protection. I swear, Clarence Thomas has the most bizarre, insane, draconian views. But he is a Supreme Court justice, and he wants to gut Section 2 of the Voting Rights Amendment. So not only did the Supreme Court not hear that Louisiana case that day, but they also said that this case specifically can be argued before the court again. And this has dangerous implications because if you recall, Citizens United was also re-argued before the court. It effectively led to corporations and labor unions gaining First Amendment rights for huge spending in elections, opening the door for wide-scale corruption. But the question on Section 2 survival may be closer than October. And this is no longer a question on if Section 2 will survive, but how long Section 2 will survive. So again, we've covered on this show multiple times what Republicans were trying to do to the 1965 Voting Rights Act as it has been weakened and threatened over the years. And they're now looking to completely gut it and render it useless before the midterms. The Supreme Court recently heard that Louisiana case. These were Supreme Court Justices Ketanji Brown Jackson and Sonia Sotomayor.
So where in Section 2 does it mandate another minority district? I mean, my understanding, as I explored with Ms. Nelson, is that Section 2 is the mechanism by which we determine that equal electoral opportunity is not being provided for a certain minority group. And we've interpreted in jingles, we've given some flesh to how one goes about identifying that set of circumstances. But I thought that's the end of it in terms of the court's announcement under Section 2, and the court then turns to the state and says, how do you want to remedy this? We've got a problem. And sometimes the state might draw a second minority district, sometimes it might not. And yet your answer to Justice Barrett was, well, everybody just knows that that's the automatic remedy. So can you help me figure out that disconnect?
Well, Justice Jackson, I think there's a reason why this court's voting precedents going all the way back to Shaw 1 are so tied up with race. It's because the remedy, as parties and the courts have understood Section 2 to operate, is almost always going to be race-based.
They're so tied up with race because that's the initial problem, right? That's the beginning. The beginning is the claim that a person makes under Section 2 that because of their race, they are not being afforded equal electoral opportunity. It is a separate question as to how we go about remedying that and the extent to which we need to use race as a remedy. That's the question we're here on today, but the Section 2 issue is just what circumstances do we look at to determine whether this problem of unequal electoral opportunity on the basis of race is occurring.
Right, and a couple of responses to that, Justice Jackson.
Wait, so can I just ask, why is that not a compelling state interest to identify areas in which that problem is occurring?
Your Honor, of course, as this court recognized in SFFA, states can remedy intentional
No, I'm not talking about the remedy. I'm talking
they can
about
identify.
Identify.
Of course.
All right, so if I'm right that Section 2 is about identifying the problem and then requiring some remedy, I don't understand why your answer to Justice Kagan's question about is this a compelling state interest is no. The answer is obviously yes.
Right, and the problem, Justice Jackson, that the Middle District identified was not intentional discrimination. And in fact, I think
why
when I
do
hear
you need intentional discrimination to remedy a problem like the one that I identified?
Because if you're going to use race the way that the Robinson appellants want the court to use race in drawing a second majority minority district, you've got to have a compelling interest.
Thank you.
And Thank you, Mr. Chief Justice.
Thank you, counsel. The bottom line is just get rid of Section 2. Because the test you're providing doesn't do anything for the effects test that Congress identified. We did say in Kassenbach, we've said it repeatedly, that legislation need only be plainly adapted to addressing discrimination practices in voting, right?
Yes.
All right? The standard that you're setting is a much different one. It has to substantially be addressing this issue. Number two, what you're suggesting is that people of one race, blacks in Louisiana, who will have to be 51% of the population before they'll be able to elect another black candidate. Because what you're saying is partisanship is non-negotiable. You have to create maps where you're going to have 6 districts out of 7 always white, because that's our partisanship. That means blacks never have a chance, no matter what their number is, until they reach more than 51%.
Once again, Supreme Court Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, as well as Supreme Court Justice Sonia Sotomayor, speaking about the Voting Rights Act and how if it is gutted, essentially this is going to dilute the vote of black and brown voters and effectively attack them, because that's the target there, to gut Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, so you can then just legally and freely do these racist gerrymandered maps all across the country without any consequence, without any political or legal consequence. And you would not get any political consequence from it because you're already suppressing the vote. So the voters cannot react to get you out of office. So it won't matter at all. What has been a wide-scale effort for years of Republicans is to make it more harder to vote, and also to make it to whereas voting is such a laborious task that you don't want to do it at all anymore. And they're expanding this under the Trump administration by going further, by targeting election equipment and election workers and machines and the systems, and using the power of the federal government to cast doubt in elections as well. It's not just that, but it's also talking about, ending elections completely. And that's what we're going to be talking about in part 2 of this special report. Stay tuned. Part 2 will be released tomorrow ahead of the TJPS Evening News Show this Friday. at 8 p.m. Eastern. So stay tuned. There's a whole lot more to talk about, and that's going to be deeper because that's even more consequential in a way that when I had previously talked about this, people called me hyperbolic, and people said that this was hyperbolic. This was not going to happen in America. It's happening right now, and they're laying the groundwork to do it ahead of these off-year elections coming up very soon. Stay tuned. Thank you for watching this video here on the Jeremiah Patterson Show YouTube channel. Please be sure to comment any suggestions, questions, or your thoughts on this video. If you're a fan of the show, please recommend it to your family and friends. You can also support us by donating financially, as this is independent journalism and we rely on your donations to continue this crucial work. Please be sure to subscribe to our website, TJPSnews.com, for free to become a member of the Jeremiah Patterson Show, where you'll be receiving emails. If you want to become a paid subscriber, you can subscribe at one of the options by joining the newsroom for $7.99 a year, the press corps for $75 a year, or the Founders Club for $150 a year, which includes perks such as paid subscriber-only content, as well as to have your name featured on the Founders Club wall on TJPSnews.com. Be sure to follow us on YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram. Remember to keep your eyes open, heads up, and stay focused.